I'm sure most of you, if you haven't already read this fantastic package that Kim put together, I mean, it traces the line between BC gangsters and international drug cartels and other drugs and foods, and really cold calculations behind how these markets are shaped. And I thought really importantly, looking at the damage that the drug trade has done to vulnerable people. But I think for those of us, particularly that are in the journalism trade here, we want to start off with what it took to put these stories together. So you show up, a reporter from some country north of the United States, places like Australia or Fiji or Vietnam, and you've got your Thank for Sun press card. I'm guessing that doesn't get you in the door very quickly. And yet you have this remarkable access to police forces in Australia and Fiji and places like that, and I can't even imagine the RCMP is forthcoming as they were with you in these other countries. So just tell us, how did that come together?
Well, it was not easy. I remember, when I got the telephone call from Your Honor saying I was lucky enough to get this fellowship, I just had an instant panic attack. It was in July, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to do this now. It's great when you're writing it out, right? As a manager, you're kind of like, I really love to do these kind of stories. Sure, I can figure this out. I can work at the international level. And then suddenly it's real, and you're like, oh my God, how do I even start, right? So, I was fortunate enough that I made a few contacts, because we've had the major methamphetamine seizures here. I've been at a Canada Border Services Agency news conference in Tuason. There wasn't that much information released, but it was pretty amazing that they had intercepted 6 tons of methamphetamine. And there was someone there from Australian Federal Police, so I grabbed his card and reached out to him. He helped me set up some of the interviews, but it really was, doing what reporters do. You Google, you find other stories, you look for sources, you find their contact information. I have paid for the fancier membership on LinkedIn, because it's not normally where I get my sources, especially in gangland. But honestly, I really found some of the people I needed to talk to through LinkedIn, right? So, and you do, like you said, they don't know who you are. I'm sure there's people in the room who've dealt with me professionally here, and I can be fairly pushy in terms of trying to get the information and trying to get an interview or whatever, but you can't do that in another country. You have to be, you have to basically be nice and I'm good at that, right? As I am at being assertive, right? So I was kind of amazed that it came together as well as it did. It didn't mean it was always smooth sailing. Like I, remember flying into Sydney for one particular interview and it got canceled, right? And you can't, you still need to work with the agency, so you can't be upset about it, but, you are upset about it, right? So it was challenging. I also met with New Zealand Police and Customs. At first they didn't want to talk because, of course, I made the mistake of asking about cases that are before the courts. And just like here, they don't want to talk about cases that are before the courts. I'm like, okay, then just general information, please. And of course, once you get in a room with someone and they can see that you know what you're talking about, they're much more forthcoming than you would expect them to be necessarily. So it was a little bit harder finding people who had been impacted by some of the Canadian drugs being shipped down to the South Pacific in particular, but I just worked, and then I worked. Right?
So kind of speed dating for sources.
Pretty
in terms
much.
of using your knowledge to show, once you're in the door, you were able to show the police or other authorities that you didn't know what you were talking about. How did that have an impact?
Well, it really helped. I took my laptop, which I don't have right in this room right now. It's a bit, maybe, I have it open all the time, so they start mentioning certain people that they had investigated, and I'm like, oh, you mean this guy, and oh, they were talking about, in Australia, this was in Melbourne, a particular investigation was completed, but it involved Vancouver cocaine smugglers. And so as soon as they mentioned the names, I had background information on each of the people that they were mentioning, including, the Dad's restaurant on Kingsway, and so they were like, oh, and his brother was facing charges. Oh, you mean Tony? And so then they were again more forthcoming. So it was, it was kind of, honestly, we all are talking about 40 years. I'm almost at 40 years too at the paper. And I would have to say that I have to use some different tactics than I would in Vancouver, to get information, to make people comfortable with me. But yeah, I feel like I was really lucky. And I did have some sources in policing in Canada, some who are abroad, who helped me make contacts, right? It wasn't 100%. Hey, I see you're on LinkedIn. I'm coming to Australia, can we meet? There was some of that, but it wasn't all that, right? But it was a process for sure.
Now, you've been reporting on gang murders and the rather lax security at the Port of Vancouver for a long time, but this fellowship allowed you some time and money to dive deeper. Give us a sense of what you learned that maybe you wouldn't have found any other way. What surprised you?
Well, it surprised me that some of the key people internationally involved in these coalitions, if you will, of transnational organized crime groups are not just Canadian, but people in BC, people that I've covered in court cases over the years, people who maybe were low-level players. I'm looking at the chief from Vancouver, I'm thinking James Riak, and he was getting picked up in 2008 in his big armored vehicle with Ricky Mann. I mean, these were kind of punk gangsters, if you will, but it was the beginning of the worst stretch of our gang violence in Vancouver. And these were the people who were involved. And there was a challenge getting them prosecuted in Canada. Lots of cases imploded. Sometimes people pleaded guilty to lesser charges. And then suddenly, it's, 2008, add it up, what is that, how many years? 2 + 4, 16 years. Reporters are notoriously bad at that. I'm sure people can attest to that in the room. And these same people who were young guys, that you wouldn't have thought could have risen to a high level, are there internationally in significant roles. That was surprising to me. It was also surprising to me when they rep their teams, so viciously in Vancouver. And by that I mean, you're in the UN gang, you have your UN tattoo, you have your, UN mantra that you follow, and you're going to go kill this guy in Brothers Keepers because, gee, you all hate each other. The people at the top that are sometimes driving that violence here in Vancouver, here in BC, because it's not just Vancouver, has happened on the island, it's happened in the interior, it's happened in the north. At the top level, they're all working together because they want to maximize their profits. And I just wish, you wish you could grab every little gangster in Vancouver and shake them. You don't know, you're being used, this is terrible, what's happening here? But that's our problem, right? And interestingly, you don't see the gang violence in some of these other places that you see in Vancouver, right? So you just wish they could understand, how they're being misused, if you will, because, yes, we talked a lot about the toxic drug crisis, which is huge, 2,500 deaths in 1 year. But I also personally, have seen the devastation of families who've lost young guys in gang violence, or, seeing a young guy at age 24 being sentenced to 2 life sentences. Very cocky in the early days of the trial, sitting there in the prisoner's dock. But, suddenly, when that sentence is coming down, they look very small and very young, right? So, yeah, I would say that surprised me is, A, how big some of our BC guys are internationally, and B, how they control things here while living in luxury and working together internationally.
Your bravery was legendary even when I was in the newsroom of the Sun 20 years ago. You were already deep into covering gang murders and putting yourself at risk. But this project, you were on foreign turf, and I'm curious about how did you manage those risks when you're abroad for the first time in the context of the subjects that you cover?
Yeah, most of the time, Australia, New Zealand, it felt pretty safe, right? Fiji, likewise, the people I was meeting with were people that were essentially dealing with, the trauma of, the street drugs, some of which are coming from Canada. So it was fine. I had a bit of a challenge in Vietnam. I did get one email partway through my time there that said, you should leave the country now. It is not safe for you to be there. And then you're like, I did feel very unnerved for a little while. And then I started to kind of go, well, this is a bit ridiculous. I did switch hotels. And I still hadn't finished the work that I needed to do there. So I had gone to Thailand the year before to investigate one gang murder, which, was another reason why I was so interested in pursuing this. It was a former BC guy, again, named Jimmy Sandu. He was deported, even though he grew up in BC, because his family never got him citizenship. He was involved with the United Nations gang and had been living overseas, and then he was shot to death in Phuket, Thailand, in a beachfront villa in February of 2022. So I'm like, wow. And there have been signs that our gang problem was spilling over to other countries. There have been a number of BC guys killed in Mexico, one in Argentina. So you knew that was happening, right? But when I went to Thailand to cover Jimmy Sandu's murder the previous December, there's all these threads that I really wanted to pursue. But I mentioned that because, I'm in Thailand. I love Thailand. It's great. You're cruising around. And I didn't post anything on social media. That's one of the measures I take to make sure I'll just say I'm out of the country, And, but just when I was just about to come back from Thailand, some of these sites that are pro-gangster Instagram accounts were posting where I had been in Thailand. And I found that, very upsetting and disturbing, right? Because I hadn't been saying where I was. So, I kind of think I know how it happened, but the fact that they can get intelligence in other countries about where you are, I was very aware of that when I went back to Thailand on this trip, and then I went to Vietnam. So, yeah, you're not in your own country. You can't assume that you have the protections that a journalist in Canada generally has, or we feel like we have. So you just have to watch your back and not be idiotic. That's what you don't go to the bar and drink too much. You don't go to a nightclub, right? You just, which is at my age pretty easy to. There you go.
Carol, I gotta bring you in here because I'm wondering what's going through your mind when you're thinking about him having to change hotels. And I guess it's an ethical question in a way, how you manage the exposure of organized crime obviously has a public benefit, but to do this, people like Kim and her sources are at a certain degree of risk, and I want to know how you deal with that.
Well, I do worry about it. I worried about it every day when she was over there. And one thing, she's careful to not let people know where she is, and then I have to be very careful not to talk to people about where Kim is, because I know she's getting this great stuff. I'm hearing from her during her trip, but I can't talk to people about that. And you just have to be very careful. And of course, I trust Kim. She's been doing this for a very long time, so her radar is up all the time for this kind of thing, whether it's here or over there. But I know that she takes precautions. I trust that she takes precautions, and of course, she knows that if she needs anything, she can come to us, and that's been necessary over the years as well. I like to think that the gangsters are not going to be that stupid. The police would be all over them if they did something like that, if they went after her.
But it was a different element when she's abroad, right?
Yes, for sure. It is out of your control, and you do feel helpless. There's nothing you can do. You can't follow her over there, but you know that she she has contacts over there. She's made all of the contacts she needs to make. As I say, she's careful. She moved to change hotels. She's not going to put herself in a dangerous situation. Although that said, I also know that she's such a fearless journalist that she does put herself in dangerous situations. She'll go whenever there's a gathering at Hells Angels Clubhouse. She wants to be there outside the clubhouse to document who's coming and going, and the police are there too, thankfully. But she's there, and they recognize her, and she's there at gang funerals. She's there to see, not just because she's voyeuristic and wants to be there, but she wants to see who's hanging out with who's showing up what that means in terms of the power structure, because she has this, she says she has a laptop, but she really has an encyclopedic mind for gangsters and who's connected to whom. She was joking the other day that she should take a wall, probably take more than a wall, to put together who's connected to who, with, you know, like you see in those crime dramas where you have a piece of yarn connecting this person and that person. That would be amazing if she ever got around to doing that. I hope she does. It would be a great photograph.
So just one follow-up, because I just remembered something. So, you know, I've been fighting for like a year and a half with global, wonderful journalist Jules Knox in Kelowna to get exhibits in the Larry Amaro, Robbie Al Khalil conspiracy to commit murder / did commit murder case. So, you know, this is this ongoing court battle. We did have a lawyer in there briefly. But I suddenly get this text message from the Crown, because I guess, because my emails were cut off in Vietnam, but we won't get into that here. But anyway, so he texts me, Kim, we need you to come to court Friday morning. I'm like, Mark, I'm in Vietnam. And, well, you can dial in, right? So I'm dialing into court, into BC Supreme Court from Ho Chi Minh City. It's midnight where I am. I'm having a beer, obviously. And Jules, I told Jules that, I said, like, I'm already having a beer, right? And I'm having to, like, make arguments over a very staticky line. And I had to say to the Crown, please, because the accused are there, right, in court. And I had to say, please don't say where I am. Because at that point, one of the accused, Larry Amaro, who's a Hells Angel, he's been convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. The other guy who was there, Dean Witcher, is on trial for murder. So I'm like, I don't want them to know I'm in where I am, right? So he's like, yeah, okay. You know, so like, you know, even just in that instance, I'm having to go, don't say I'm in Vietnam. And I was imagining, you know, because when you're appearing by video in court, it often like has like where you are like typed in on the screen, and I'm like, I mean, they couldn't see me. That's why I was having a beer. We did win our arguments, but I haven't had time to write that story yet, right, from the exhibits. But that was just a bit like, I had to really think, oh geez, I don't want, because these guys have connections over there. Anyway, it was just kind of fun.
I'm gonna ask Harold one more question, then I'm gonna open it up to questions, so I'll just give you guys a little bit of advance notice. But Harold, obviously an expensive kind of project that maybe you didn't have the resources to do without this fellowship, and in fact, I can't imagine it would happen without some support. So you've got some of the people in the room here who helped make this happen, and I guess, what do you want to say about the value of what you guys have produced with this package?
The value, the work that Kim did, for sure. Well, I'm very grateful. I've told her on her, I'm very grateful for her, not just because we received the fellowship, but for the idea of the fellowship, that journalism matters, that it's important to democracy. We know from talking to readers, the stories that they value most, and journalists in the room know this, are those stories that connect the dots for them on important issues like organized crime and why are gangsters shooting each other in Metro Vancouver and around the province. You know, why are trucks running into overpasses? Why don't we have enough family doctors? All of these important questions that journalists need to answer that never have simple answers, or there wouldn't be an issue. Someone would fix it. So it's usually multiple reasons. So in this case, you know, Kim was able to go and travel. You know, it wasn't easy. Travel for 6 weeks, all over, you know, Southeast Asia and Australia, etc., and then come back and disgorge all of that information from her notebooks and her tapes. And then, you know, she did the vast majority of the work, but then there's also, you know, many hours by editors and photographers and video editors and people who put these packages together. And these days, of course, they're putting it together for a print newspaper, and then they're doing a whole other presentation for online. So there is a big investment in time, mostly by Kim, but by other people. But I do think it pays off, not only in that, you know, the story that was tremendously well read. There's an accountability piece on a number of different levels. Just to pick one, you know, there's the absence of the port police, and there was a report by the city of Delta that commissioned and released last November. Was it, Kim? November?
Was it the Germain?
Yeah.
The
German report.
Yeah, that was arguing, making the case for Port Police, and the Delta Police Chief was saying yesterday that they were getting nowhere. They had no response from the Solicitor General in Victoria, nothing from Ottawa, and then Kim's series came out, and now Minister Farnworth is talking about Port Police, right? Sometimes it takes something like this to get the politician.
So I have lots more questions, but I do want to open up, and I want to start, and this was Kim's request, that we start with some of the journalism students in the room before we get to some of our longer in the tooth colleagues. Just to make sure you get a chance. If any of you guys have any questions?